The crack of a single gunshot echoed through the valley as the last mourner departed, leaving Rebecca Foster alone with her 6 children beside her husband's fresh grave. Spring of 1879 had brought not renewal but devastation to the young widow's life in the small frontier town of Juniper Creek, Wyoming Territory. At 32, Rebecca stood rigid against the wind that swept across the plains, her black dress billowing as she clutched her youngest child's hand, wondering how she would possibly go on. 3 months later, as July heat baked the dusty Main Street, Rebecca scrubbed laundry behind the boarding house where she'd taken work after selling most of their belongings. Her hands were raw, her back aching, but the meager pay meant food for Thomas, Sarah, Abigail, Joseph, Elizabeth, and little Daniel. The children helped where they could, the oldest at 13, the youngest just 4, but survival seemed an endless uphill battle. Mrs. Foster, Mrs. Simmons, the boarding house owner, called from the back door. "There's a gentleman asking after you." Wiping her hands on her apron, Rebecca smoothed her hair and walked around to the front of the building. Standing at the counter was a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes, his hat respectfully removed and held in calloused hands. "Mrs. Foster, I'm Vaughn Blackwood," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "I wondered if I might have a word." Rebecca recognized him vaguely, one of the ranchers from beyond the creek, a quiet man who rarely came to town. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood? Perhaps we could speak privately." He glanced at Mrs. Simmons, who was making a poor show of not listening. They stepped outside onto the porch, where Rebecca could keep an eye on her younger children playing in the side yard. "Mrs. Foster, I'll speak plainly. I own the Diamond B Ranch about 5 miles west. I've been looking for a housekeeper, someone to cook and keep things in order. The pay would be 3 times what you're making here, with a proper cabin for you and your children." Rebecca studied him. Vaughn Blackwood was perhaps 40, with streaks of silver at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. Rumors said he'd come west after the war, built his ranch from nothing into one of the more prosperous spreads in the territory. "Why me, Mr. Blackwood? There are plenty of women in town who could keep house for a bachelor." His eyes shifted to her children. "I've seen how hard you work, how devoted you are to your family. My ranch is growing. I need someone reliable." There was something he wasn't saying, but the prospect of better pay and a real home for her children was too tempting to dismiss. "I would need to bring all my children. Of course, there's plenty of room, and work suited to the older ones if they're willing." A week later, Rebecca and her children arrived at the Diamond B in a wagon driven by Vaughn himself. The main house was modest but solid, 2 stories of weathered timber with a wide porch. Behind it stood a smaller cabin, freshly whitewashed. "This will be your home," Vaughn said, helping unload their few possessions. "I had the men fix it up last week." Inside, Rebecca found 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a proper stove, and furniture that, while simple, was far better than what she'd been forced to sell after James died. "Mr. Blackwood, this is too much. It's been empty since my foreman built himself a place closer to town. Better it be used." His eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Supper's at 6 in the main house. I'll see you then." Life at the Diamond B quickly fell into rhythm. Rebecca cooked, cleaned, and mended for Vaughn and his 4 ranch hands. The older children helped with chores, Thomas with the horses, Sarah and Abigail learning to garden and preserve food. Joseph shadowed the Cowboys, soaking up every bit of ranch knowledge they would share, while Elizabeth helped care for little Daniel. Vaughn was a fair employer, generous even but reserved. He took meals with them but spoke little, retiring to his study most evenings. Rebecca occasionally caught him watching her children with an expression she couldn't decipher, not displeasure, but something deeper, more complex. One evening in late August, after the children were asleep, Rebecca found Vaughn sitting alone on the porch, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded, standing briefly until she took a seat. "The children are settling in well," she said. "Thomas told me you've been teaching him to ride properly. He's a quick learner, reminds me of." Vaughn paused. "He's a good boy. Mr. Blackwood, may I ask you something? Why did you really bring us here? A single man doesn't typically want a house full of children underfoot." The silence stretched long enough that Rebecca thought he might not answer. "I had a family once," he finally said, his voice so quiet she had to lean closer. "During the war. A wife, a son and daughter. Cholera took them while I was fighting at Vicksburg." His fingers tightened around the glass. "Coming west was supposed to be a new start. I built this place thinking someday I'd try again, find someone, have children running through these fields. I'm sorry. 15 years passed before I knew it. Then I saw you and your children at your husband's funeral, the way you stood so strong for them." He finally looked at her. "This place was meant for a family, Mrs. Foster. It's too quiet without one." Rebecca understood then he wasn't looking just for a housekeeper, but for the sounds and life a family brought to a home. It wasn't charity, it was mutual need. As autumn painted the surrounding hills gold and crimson, Rebecca noticed subtle changes in Vaughn. He began joining the family more often, teaching the boys to whittle in the evenings, listening to the girls' raiding. He built a swing from a sturdy oak branch for the younger children and showed Thomas how to mend tack in the barn. When September brought the first day of school, Vaughn arrived at breakfast with 5 new slates and pencils. "Town's a fair distance. I'll drive you in the wagon each morning," he told the school-aged children. "You don't need to do that," Rebecca protested. "You have the ranch to run." "Education matters," he replied simply. James would have wanted it. It was the first time he'd mentioned her late husband by name, and something in his tone respectful, not jealous of the ghost between them, touched Rebecca deeply. On a brisk October morning, Rebecca was kneading bread dough when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Vaughn carrying little Daniel, whose face was streaked with tears. Behind them trailed Elizabeth, looking frightened. "What happened?" Rebecca rushed outside, wiping flour from her hands. "He fell from the corral fence," Vaughn explained, his voice calm despite the worry in his eyes. "Trying to pet the new foal, his arm might be broken." Rebecca's heart pounded. "The doctor was in town miles away. I've seen breaks before," Vaughn said. "Let me have a look inside." With gentle hands, he examined Daniel's arm while the boy tried bravely not to cry. "It's a clean break," he pronounced. "I can set it, but it'll hurt something fierce for a moment." "You trust me, Daniel?" Vaughn asked, looking into the child's eyes. The boy nodded through his tears. "Rebecca, hold him steady." With swift efficiency, Vaughn set the bone. Daniel screamed once, then buried his face against his mother's shoulder. Vaughn fashioned a splint and sling from materials in his medical kit, speaking softly to Daniel the whole time, telling him about a horse he'd had as a boy that could count to 10 by pawing the ground. By evening, Daniel was sleeping peacefully, exhausted from his ordeal. Rebecca found Vaughn chopping wood behind the house with unusual vigor. "He'll be fine," she said. "Thanks to you." Vaughn paused, axe held mid-swing. "I should have been watching more carefully. Children get hurt, it happens." He lowered the axe. "My son was 4 when he died, just like Daniel." Rebecca's throat tightened. She stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you for taking care of him today, for taking care of all of us." That night marked a turning point. The invisible barrier Vaughn had maintained began to dissolve. He joined them for evening meals without fail, helped with homework, and on Sundays drove them all to church in town. It was there the whispers started. Mighty convenient, isn't it? Poor widow, 6 children, wealthy rancher. Taking in another man's brood, must be getting something in return. Never figured Blackwood for a fool. Rebecca pretended not to hear, but the barbed comments stung. Vaughn, if he noticed, gave no indication. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Rebecca woke to find Vaughn had already cleared paths to the barn and outbuildings. When she stepped onto the porch with coffee, she found him building a snowman with her youngest 3 children, his usual reserve replaced by rare laughter. "Mama, look, Mr. Vaughn made snow angels with us," Elizabeth called, pointing to the impressions in the pristine snow. Something warmed in Rebecca's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee's heat. That evening, after the children were asleep, Vaughn asked Rebecca to remain at the table. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about the future." Rebecca's pulse quickened. Over the months, her feelings for this quiet, honorable man had grown deeper than gratitude, though she'd kept them carefully guarded. The children need stability, a permanent home. He met her eyes directly. "I'd like to offer that to them, to you." "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood?" "Marriage." The word hung between them. "A partnership. I know it's not romantic. Is that what you want, a practical arrangement?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "I've grown fond of your children, and I respect you greatly, Mrs. Foster." "Fond, respect." Rebecca's voice was soft. "Is that all?" Something shifted in his expression. "No," he admitted, "but I wouldn't presume." "Presume what?" "That you could feel more for me. Your husband hasn't been gone a year." Rebecca studied him, this man who had opened his home and heart to her family, asking so little in return. "James would want us to be happy," she said. "And the children adore you. And you, Rebecca." He rarely used her given name, and it sounded like a caress. "I think I could be very happy as your wife, Vaughn Blackwood." They married on Christmas Eve in the town church, a simple ceremony with the children as attendants. Thomas stood proud and straight as he walked his mother down the aisle. Sarah and Abigail scattered pine needles instead of flowers. Joseph carried the rings on a small cushion while Elizabeth held Daniel's hand to keep him from running toward his new stepfather too soon. The town turned out in full, some to wish them well, others to whisper behind their hands. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn kissed Rebecca with a tenderness that silenced the room. The whispers didn't stop, of course. At the general store, the bank, the post office, Rebecca heard them all. Married herself a meal ticket. Those poor children, calling another man pa so soon. She worked fast, didn't she? 6 children that ain't even his Blackwood's lost his mind. Vaughn never acknowledged the talk, but Rebecca saw the tightening around his eyes when they were in town. She worried the gossip would drive a wedge between them, that he would regret his choice. Instead, he threw himself into building something remarkable. It began with the study. One evening in January, Vaughn invited the entire family inside the room that had previously been his private retreat. "I've been thinking," he said, spreading papers across his desk. "This ranch should belong to all of us. I want each of you to have a place here, something of your own." The papers were drawings, plans for expanding the ranch house, adding bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a dedicated schoolroom. "And outside," he continued, turning to a larger sketch, "I want to build something special." The drawing showed elaborate gardens, an orchard, a pond with a small dock, stables sized for ponies, and what appeared to be a small schoolhouse. "Is this all for us?" Thomas asked, eyes wide. "For our family," Vaughn corrected gently. "And maybe someday for other families too. I've been thinking about opening the ranch in summers to children from town who might benefit from fresh air and learning about ranching. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. Vaughn, this is too much. He looked uncertain. Wonderful, she finished, taking his hand. As winter gave way to spring, the transformation began. Lumber arrived by the wagon load. Craftsmen from town and neighboring ranches came to help, curious about Blackwood's grand plans. Some scoffed initially, but Vaughn's determination was contagious. The house expanded room by room. Each child helped design their own space, with Vaughn patiently explaining why some ideas were possible and others weren't. For Thomas, a room with a window overlooking the horse pasture. For the girls, built-in bookshelves and window seats. For Joseph, a desk with compartments for his growing collection of interesting rocks and feathers. Even little Daniel had input on the color of his walls. Rebecca watched her quiet, reserved husband come alive in the building process. He worked alongside the hired men, teaching the older children basic carpentry as they went. In the evenings, he would sketch additional details, asking for her input, genuinely interested in her opinions. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the half-built structures in gold. A family, a purpose beyond just accumulating land and cattle. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder. "The children have changed too. They're putting down roots here with you." "With us," he corrected, kissing her forehead. By midsummer, the main house renovations were complete and work began on the outdoor projects. The pond was dug, lined, and filled. Fruit trees were planted in neat rows. Garden beds took shape, with the children each responsible for their own plot. Most ambitious was what Vaughn called the learning barn, a structure designed with one half for regular barn activities, and the other outfitted as a classroom, workshop, and library combined. "Children should learn by doing," he explained to Rebecca. "Books are important, but so are hands and hearts." Word of the Diamond BTK's transformation spread throughout the county. Curiosity brought visitors, first neighbors, then townspeople who had previously been content to gossip from afar. The Petersons came first, ostensibly to sell horses but clearly curious about the rumors. They left impressed, Mrs. Peterson especially taken with the gardens and Rebecca's obvious happiness. The banker, Mr. Hayes, arrived to discuss a loan for additional cattle but spent more time examining the learning barn, asking thoughtful questions about Vaughn's educational philosophy. Even Pastor Williams made the journey, bringing his wife and 3 children for Sunday dinner after church. He left with a standing invitation to bring any town children who might benefit from summer days at the ranch. Slowly, the whispers changed. "Have you seen what Blackwood's building out there? Those children are learning more than they would in any schoolhouse." Never seen the foster boy smile so much when his father was alive. God rest his soul. They say he's opening the place up to any child who wants to learn ranching. The most surprising visitor came in early autumn. Howard Tanner, the wealthiest man in the county and a notorious curmudgeon, arrived unannounced one Saturday morning. He'd been among the loudest critics of Vaughn's marriage, making cutting remarks within Rebecca's hearing on multiple occasions. Vaughn met him in the yard, his stance protective as Rebecca and the children worked in the garden nearby. "Blackwood," Tanner nodded curtly. "Heard some talk about what you're doing out here." "Mr. Tanner," Vaughn's voice was carefully neutral. "What can I do for you?" The older man surveyed the property, taking in the expanded house, the learning barn, the children's garden plots, each marked with hand-painted signs. "My grandson," he said finally. "Boy's mother died last year. My son's raising him alone in town, working at the sawmill." Boys running wild, no discipline. He cleared his throat. Heard you might be taking in children sometimes, teaching them things. Vaughn's posture relaxed slightly. We're planning to, yes, starting next spring probably. Tanner nodded, eyes still roaming the property. Good soil you've got. Good water. Boys should learn about such things. He'd be welcome, Vaughn said simply. How old is he? 8. Smart but troubled. Needs a man's guidance, I understand. Tanner finally looked directly at Vaughn. Didn't think much of you marrying the foster widow. Seemed like folly. His gaze shifted to where Rebecca worked with the children, all of them laughing as they harvested carrots. I may have been hasty in my judgment. It was as close to an apology as Howard Tanner had likely ever given. Vaughn accepted it with a nod. Stay for lunch. Rebecca's made her potato soup. To everyone's surprise, he did. As autumn deepened, the Diamond Bee welcomed more visitors. Former critics arrived with offers of help, seeds for the spring planting, books for the growing library. What had begun as a project for one family was becoming a community vision. One crisp evening in late October, Rebecca found Vaughn in the learning barn installing shelves for the children's natural history collections. The Wilsons have offered to donate their old piano, she told him. For singing lessons next summer. Vaughn smiled. We'll need to make room. Perhaps along that wall. Rebecca moved to stand beside him, surveying the space they'd created together. Did you ever imagine this when you asked me to be your housekeeper last year? He set down his tools and turned to face her. Not specifically this, but I hoped for something meaningful. And has it been? Instead of answering immediately, Vaughn took her hands in his. Rebecca, there's something I've been meaning to tell you, something important. Her heart skipped. What is it? When I asked you to marry me, I spoke of fondness and respect, of partnership. His voice grew softer. I wasn't entirely honest. Oh, she tried to keep her voice steady. I loved you already then, had for months, but I didn't want you to feel pressured or to think I expected anything you weren't ready to give. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Why tell me now? Because I see how you look at me sometimes when you think I don't notice, and I've been a fool not to say it before. He cupped her face gently. I love you, Rebecca Blackwood, not just as the mother of 6 wonderful children, not just as my partner in all this. He gestured to the building around them. But as the woman who brought light back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. Rebecca reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. I've loved you since the day you set Daniel's arm and couldn't chop wood fast enough to hide your fear. Vaughn laughed softly. That long, maybe before, but that's when I knew for certain. He kissed her then, deeply and without reserve, in a way he rarely did outside the privacy of their bedroom. When they parted, Rebecca rested her head against his chest. I have something to tell you too, she whispered. What's that? She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. Our family is going to grow again, in the spring. Vaughn went still, then dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her still flat abdomen. When he looked up, tears streaked his weathered cheeks. Are you happy? She asked softly, beyond words. He stood and gathered her in his arms. Do the children know? Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. 7 children, he murmured, wonder in his voice. Too many, she teased gently. Never enough. He kissed her again. This ranch was always meant for a big family. On Christmas morning, exactly 1 year after their wedding, the Diamond Bee hosted its first community celebration. Families from town and neighboring ranches gathered in the learning barn, transformed with evergreen boughs and candles into a festive hall. The children performed songs and recitations. Food covered long tables. Even Howard Tanner attended, his grandson in tow, the boy's eyes wide at the playground equipment Vaughn had built that fall. After the meal, Vaughn called for everyone's attention. With Rebecca at his side, he announced the spring baby and unveiled the final plans for what would now be called the Diamond B Children's Ranch, a place where any child in the county could come to learn, play, and grow. "A year ago," he said, his arm around Rebecca's waist, "people thought I was a fool for taking on a ready-made family. Maybe I was." He looked at the 6 children seated in the front row, their faces shining with pride. "The best kind of fool. These children and their mother taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about love, commitment, and building something together that's bigger than ourselves." Thomas, now 14 and growing into a young man, stood up. "3 cheers for Pa," he called out, using the name he'd only recently begun to call Vaughn. The room erupted in hurrahs, drowning out the memory of whispers and judgment. Later that night, when all the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Vaughn and Rebecca stood on the porch of their expanded home, looking out at the ranch that had become so much more than a cattle operation. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked, nestled against him for warmth. "About legacy," he replied. "My father built fortunes and lost them, never seemed satisfied. I came west thinking I'd build something that would last: cattle, land, buildings. And you have." He shook his head. "Those aren't what matter. This," he gestured toward the children's bedrooms, "this is what lasts. The love we give them, the values they'll carry forward, the welcome they'll extend to others." Rebecca reached up to touch the silver at his temples. "For a man of few words, that was quite a speech, Mr. Blackwood." "Must be your influence, Mrs. Blackwood." He placed a hand on her stomach where their child grew. "Or maybe I'm just practicing for when I have 7 children to advise." "7 at minimum," she teased. "Who knows what the future holds?" In the clear winter night, the Diamond B stood as a testament to what love could build: not just structures of wood and stone, but a legacy of compassion, learning, and family that would endure long after the last gossip had faded to silence. And as Vaughn Blackwood kissed his wife beneath the star-filled Wyoming sky, he knew with absolute certainty that the greatest thing he'd ever built wasn't the ranch or the buildings that dotted its land. It was the home they'd created together, for children present and future, and for each other, a home built on the foundation of a love that had begun with an act of kindness and grown into something strong enough to silence even the harshest critics. A love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them.